In this video, we will see the scopes of a JSP application. So there are four possible scopes, which are page, request, session, and application. Unlike the scopes of a servlet, which were just request, session, and application, which is also called as context. So page is the default scope, and the page object is accessible only from within the current JSP page. So this page scope is basically only valid for the current JSP page, and even if the control is forwarded somewhere or the request is forwarded somewhere, this page scope will not remain valid because it is only valid for the current page. The page scope object is stored in the page context object. So if we want to access some page scope objects, then we can use this page context object. This is an implicit object, so we can directly use it. And this page scope will end when our current JSP page will stop executing. Even if we refresh the page, so if we are working with a JSP page and if we refresh this page, then it will create new instances of all the objects which were related to that page. Next is the request scope. So the request scope is accessible from any JSP page which is serving the same HTTP request. So when a request is received from a client, as soon as the request has started being served, so as soon as the service methods starts executing, the request scope will be live, and this request scope will remain valid until and unless that request has been served by sending some appropriate response back to the client. So this request scope is the same as the request scope of a servlet, and to access the objects related to this request object, we can directly use the implicit object which is named request. So we need not create the object, we can directly use it. Also, one more point to remember is that even if this request has been forwarded or included somewhere, this request will still remain valid. It is the same concept that we have seen in servlets. So until and unless the response has been sent, the request scope will remain valid. So it can remain valid across multiple JSP pages as well. The next scope is session scope. So session scope is accessible from any JSP page that is sharing the same HTTP session. So as we have seen that the session scope will only end when the session times out or if the session has been invalidated. So until and unless this happens, the session will remain the same. So a session may consist of multiple requests and response, and it will not end when the request is sent or when the response is received. And the fourth scope of a JSP is the application scope. So this object, the application object, is accessible from any JSP page that has been created in our web application. So there might be n number of JSP pages in our web application, and all of them can access the application object. So this application object is also a implicit object which we have in JSP, and there is only one application object for one web application. So whenever we want to access any context related, that is web application related objects, then we can use this application object. The scope of this object will end when the application terminates. So if we are closing our web application, let's say if we are closing the web application for some updates or for some maintenance, otherwise if we are shutting down the server, so in that case the application scope will end